Again, I'm Chad Cooper. I'm the Executive Director of Sustainable Sanctuary Coalition, and I just want to welcome each of you. A lot of familiar faces, but maybe some new faces too. And so, Sustainable Sanctuary, we're a 501c3 nonprofit based in Kansas City, and we really try to connect people of faith with environmental issues and environmental action. And so, one thing that we do is for quite a while, have been doing these basically monthly programs where we invite an expert to come out and share, and we'll learn from them. Before COVID, it was almost always in person, and we usually do it on the first Monday night of each month. Sometimes we do special projects where we do it on a Friday night, Saturday. Different congregations. We did something with Laudato Si. Over at Scott's Church, I think, a couple years ago, and we love partnering with people of all faiths to try to get the faith community not only to care for creation, but as we learned from Bill at our last program about creating justice for creation as well. And so I'm really excited to have Jasmin here tonight to share with us not only a lot of knowledge, but a lot of expertise in engaging with the heartland here with Kansas and Douglas County. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jasmin and let her share a little bit about herself and get us going. So anyway, thanks for presenting for us tonight, Jasmin.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Chad. I appreciate the invitation and opportunity to be with you all tonight. I will say that I have a presentation, but because we're a pretty small group, if y'all want to ask questions as we go along, I'm good with that. You can either put them in the chat or unmute yourself. I think that'll work out just fine. So I will start by sharing my screen. Okay. And I like to start just by giving some context of who I am and how I got to this position. Sustainability director is not something that's common. And in fact, in the state of Kansas, there's only two of us, one in Johnson County and one in Douglas County / city of Lawrence. So my story and path to this place started at KU. I grew up in the Kansas City area, ended up at KU for undergrad, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do because, of course, sustainability didn't exist as a term or a profession back then. And I was in the field of applied behavioral sciences, and which is all about like how to facilitate behavior change. And I was interested in, on the health side of things, the public health side of things. And we had a speaker come to one of our classes in my final semester at KU. And that person was from the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, based out of Atlanta. And they talked about how there was a case study of the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. And if anybody's been to Atlanta, you know that traffic is really, really bad. And so you can imagine during an international event what that would mean for traffic. And so they really told people, don't even try to drive during this time period. And so it was a suggestion. It wasn't, an enforcement, but it was a suggested behavior change. And during the period of the Olympics, they saw about a 25% decrease in traffic during that time. And at the same time, they observed some health changes. And the major one was that the number of asthma hospitalizations drastically dropped during that time period, about 40%. The same number of people, broke their arm, same number of people had heart attacks. But when it came to asthma hospitalizations, it was a dramatic decrease. And so they were able to demonstrate that because the air quality improved, because cars weren't on the road, that had a direct implication to the health of a community. And so that was the point where I said, that's the type of behavior change that I'm interested in. That's the type of policy change that I'm interested in, because that one suggested behavior had a tremendous impact on the health of a community, the whole health of a community. And so that was the point in my career where I started looking to see what is that job. And I started looking into and discovering the field of urban planning. It was not something that I had heard of before, not something that was on my radar, but as I started to think about transportation patterns and health, that's where it all started to come together for me. So ultimately, I ended up in the public in planning as an urban planner, and was able to do research related to the built environment and the impact on our public health. And that connection really lended itself well to slide easily into the field of sustainability, which is all about systems and how different systems interact with each other. So I ended up working for the city of San Antonio as a planner, and then moved to Little Rock, Arkansas, where I was able to serve as a planner for the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And that's where sustainability was starting to become a term that our member cities in the area were asking more about. And I was able to step in and lead a regional sustainability planning effort for the Central Arkansas region, and really get into what does sustainability mean for Central Arkansas, because language is really important. You all know that. And so, stepping into Central Arkansas with a definition from California related to sustainability was not going to fly. And so did a lot of work with the community to define what does sustainability mean for us in that community at the time. And through that work, I was able to move into a leadership position within Johnson County, Kansas, and ultimately in the city of Lawrence and Douglas County about 3 years ago, stepped into the director position for sustainability here. So I wanted to give you also a picture of our team. So we are a relatively small office of 4. 2 of us are full-time and 2 of us are part-time. So it's myself and then Kim, who's our sustainability and food system analyst. We have Connie, who's our intern, and then Jamie, who recently came on board as our food waste reduction specialist. And we got a grant to explore what composting food might look like in Lawrence, as well as how can we connect food that is left out in the field is still perfectly healthy, but it is just not pretty enough to go be sold at market, and getting that food connected with people who need it. So we're really excited to be able to expand to that position this year. And I think you'll hear some of the other exciting things that we have in the works related to climate. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what climate change looks like in our part of the country, what steps we're taking, and then get to some of the individual actions that can be a part of this larger change. So I always like to start with definitions. Like I said, sustainability is a term. Yes. So Jerry put it in the chat, gleaners. So yes, we are have a gleaning program, and I'll tell a little bit more about that later. So sustainability, I like to talk about as living today like you really believe there's going to be a tomorrow, and the next day, and the next decade after that, and generations to come. So if you think about it in that context, then that really impacts the way that you interact with the earth around you, the natural environment. It impacts the way that you interact with the people that are in your space, and it impacts the way that you utilize the resources that you have, whether that be a financial resource or natural resources. And so I just took a a snapshot of some of the terms that we encounter on a daily basis and put it into this little word cloud to symbolize what sustainability means today for me, because we're working on all of these things, from food systems to equitable transit to equity to recycling and composting to even COVID response. And so sustainability is very broad. Today, we're going to focus in on climate, but you'll see that even with that lens, it still encompasses a lot. So I wanted to start off by talking about what climate change looks like in the heartland where we are. This climate vulnerability assessment was done as a part of a larger regional effort, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But it's intended to look at, okay, what are the chances that these conditions will happen? And then how severe is the consequence if these things happen? And so if you look in the upper right-hand corner, the deepest red there, are the 3 top things that we are concerned about when it comes to climate change for our region. 1 is flooding, 2 is extreme heat, and 3 is drought. So those are the 3 conditions that we expect to, and we're already starting to see, be more extreme conditions than we have in the past. Those are the top 3 that we are really concerned about, and as it relates to climate change. And those are the top 3 that we need to be spending resources on to say, how we know these things are happening, so how can we start to adjust so that we can be better prepared when they do happen next. So as you think about those 3 things, I wanted to just bring it home to some specific examples. And in 2019, so not that long ago, a couple years ago, we had a lot of flooding. If you think back to that, there was a summer where we had rain event after rain event after rain event, and there wasn't time in between those rain events to recover, for the land to recover or the infrastructure to recover. So I know in Douglas County, we had millions of dollars worth of damage done during those flood events. And we had 3 communities near one of our lakes that actually had to have alternate water suppliers because the flooding caused the water supply to not be healthy. And so that's a direct example of what these extreme weather events look like. And I think if you'll think back to where you were in 2019 during that flood event, you may have had a flooded basement, or you may have been in an area where the road was closed and you couldn't get to where you needed to go. We've also, just reflecting back in the last 40 years, our region has had more extreme heat and humidity than we expected in the past. So the amount of heat and humidity has more than doubled since 40 years ago. And right now, Douglas County is experiencing about 6 days of temperatures over 105 degrees. And we're expecting that is going to dramatically increase in the next 50 years to possibly up to 66 days of extreme heat and humidity over 105 degrees. So when you think about the implications for quality of life and how you interact with the world and the people around you, what that might look like if you were experiencing the world with that amount of extreme heat and humidity, and thinking about how that might impact your physical health. So thinking about if you have asthma or other respiratory challenges, and what that humidity does related to that. And also thinking about other chronic conditions that are escalated with heat. It's really scary to think about. And so if we're not planning for that, then we will be ill prepared when it starts to happen with more and more frequency. So as it relates to extreme weather, I wanted to just pause for a moment and see, you can just even raise your hand or put in the chat or just think to yourself. But I want you to think about these couple questions. So first is, if there were to be an extreme weather event tomorrow that hits, whether that be flooding or extreme heat, do you feel like you are prepared? So if you want to answer, you can do a thumbs up or thumbs down or in the middle, or you can just reflect on it personally. I see some thumbs down, some middles. Okay. And then I want you to think back to February when we had that extreme cold snap and where they started doing the rolling blackouts. Did you have someone that checked on you during that time period? Do a thumbs up or thumbs down, or you could put it in the chat. Okay, so reflecting on just those two examples, one of the things that is really key to being prepared for our changing climate is the idea of social cohesion, which is kind of a fancy word for just saying, like, how are we connected to each other? In our religious communities, we have connections and we know how important that fellowship is with each other. The same thing is really important when it comes to being resilient related to these climate events and these extreme weather events. If we are not connected to each other, then we have a higher risk of not surviving whatever is next. And so if you think back to that cold snap that happened in February, especially south of us, like in Texas, where they're not used to that at all, and people didn't have power, and their neighbors weren't checking on them. They didn't have anybody check on them. There was, how were they going to get the food that they needed, make sure that they were warm enough, those types of things. So those are the types of conversations that we need to have as a part of not only climate is changing, we need to be prepared or reduce our greenhouse gas emissions personally, but thinking about, what does this mean for us and for our families and for the people that we're connected to in our neighborhoods, in our religious communities, and those types of things. So thanks for your participation. All right, so next we are going to get into what is contributing to the problem. So we talked about, climate is changing. We're starting to see these trends in extreme weather. But what's our part in this mess? So we know that climate is changing because of greenhouse gas emissions. This is just a snapshot visual of the city of Lawrence adopted some goals back in 2010 related to how the city wanted to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. And back in 2010, the conversation was really focused on how can we all reduce our carbon footprint, essentially. It was less about climate change is happening, we need to adjust. It was, how can we stop it from happening? We hadn't quite realized that, like, we're beyond the tipping point. So we need to be thinking about how we continue to reduce carbon, but also how we need to adjust. And so, so this is just a snapshot of what our goals were at that time. And then 2017, we were making good progress down from our 2005 baseline by 26% as a community. There was still a long way to go. And since then, we know now that even this target wasn't fast enough. So we need to be moving even faster than this. And so this next slide just gives us a sense of what are who's at play here when it comes to contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. So there's two breakdowns here. On the left, you'll see it broken down in terms of type of sector when it comes to transportation, and then residential buildings and commercial buildings. And so you'll see that transportation sector makes up 34% of our greenhouse gas emissions profile. So that's the biggest area that we have a big opportunity to do improvements. When you look above that, then the next biggest category is commercial and institutional buildings. And then following that is residential buildings at 29%. Another way of looking at it is the circle on the right, which is looking at energy sector as a whole, which is 62%. So that's your heating and cooling of buildings. And then the transportation sector, which is at 34%. So when you think about jumped ahead there. When you think about what is contributing to our current challenge of the climate crisis, our biggest opportunities are reducing energy and reducing our emissions when it comes to transportation, which for the most part right now is gasoline vehicles. So the next piece of this that I want to talk about is we talked about who's contributing to the problem and what that looks like. Now I want to talk about who's impacted most by climate change and the system. This is a map of the Kansas City metro area and Douglas County. Usually Douglas County is not included, but we lobbied to get in on the climate action stuff. So this is a map of the Kansas City metro area plus Douglas County. And you will see that it is looking at socioeconomic stress index, which you don't have to understand. But I wonder if you look at this map, you'll notice that it is darkest in the most urban parts of our metro area and is lightest as it gets more out into the rural areas and the suburban areas. And what this is basically showing is that there are factors that cause climate change to be more harmful to certain populations than others. And these are the same factors that contribute to racism. These are the same factors that contribute to poverty. These are the same factors that contribute to environmental justice issues. So these are all systemic issues that I think that you'll see. I think COVID was an example of how we could all see how COVID, it was one virus, but it impacted different populations very differently. And similarly, climate change is impacting different populations very differently. So we know that the data shows that Black, Indigenous, and people of color actually bear the worst impact of environmental harm because of these centuries of systemic segregation, mistreatment, active disinvestment in these communities of color. And if you think about how this plays out, some examples are, if you think about types of jobs that people have, and we know that extreme heat was one of the things that we're really concerned about. And we think about people who don't have a choice of working outside or not. And you can't, the elements are going to be there. And so I'm thinking of like people that work on the highway and fixing highways, people who drive school buses, people who are working outside a lot, and you don't have a choice about getting to shelter or not. And the demographics of what those service industries look like. We saw during COVID that a lot of the essential workers related to grocery store workers were a higher percentage of people of color. Restaurant workers were a higher percentage of people of color. Early childhood providers were higher percentage, women of color specifically. And so if you think about as this plays out on the climate side, we're seeing these same types of disparities and inequities that we do for a lot of different other things as well. But wanted to highlight that especially as it relates to climate. Okay, so now what do we do with all that? information. One of the things that I mentioned earlier is that this is systemic. This is a big challenge. This is a global crisis. And so thinking about how we approach this as a city, as a county, as a region, and as an individual can sometimes be very daunting and overwhelming. One of the ways that we are approaching this as a region is coming together, multiple cities and counties coming together to talk about what are the strategies that we can do in unison, so that it's not about each city coming up with their own climate plan, but what as a region can we agree to as the path forward, and then each individual city can figure out what works best for them. And so this process, the Climate Action KC process, to develop a climate action plan, has been in the works for several years now. And we do have at least one other person on the call that's been involved in this process, which is Joan Levins. This is something that is pretty innovative when it comes to looking at how we are doing climate action in the US. Historically, it has been about like a municipality, one city, figuring out how to do it. And so our region came together and said, let's figure out how to do this together. And because of that, have been recognized actually internationally because of this work. So the website is in the slides, and I'll also put it in the chat later so that people can explore this. This plan was more than a year in the making and was recently adopted just 2 months ago in March, that lays out some specific action plans that people in our region can take to make progress on our climate crisis. So let me see, let me make sure I'm on track here, on time. So I wanted to, oops, I went too far, share a couple of the targets that were elevated through this process. The big one was net zero by 2050. So there are 3 components to this. One is looking at how to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions just for local government operations by 2030. So we know that there's going to be some emissions. We can't eliminate all emissions, but we can also think about how to absorb emissions back down. So this is, it's net because we know there's going to be inputs and outputs. And so the goal is to have that balance out to zero for local government operations by 2030. The next goal is related to energy generation. So net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2035 for energy generations. And then the third one is related to emissions from homes and buildings at net zero by 2040. Now you remember back to that slide of those circles, buildings were making up 63% of the profile. And so getting to net zero for those homes and buildings would have a very significant impact on our profile in terms of greenhouse gases. So there are some ways that the region has identified how to make progress on that goal. Those 5 are listed here, and I would encourage you to check out the website for the specifics on what that could look like. And next, I want to talk about the action areas. So, that gave us 5 specific actions, but this is really talking about the 9 different areas that the plan gets into specific details of goals and strategies focused on how to, 1, reduce our contribution to our greenhouse gas emissions, and then 2, how can we start to adapt to the climate change that we're already starting to see. So of these 9 categories, there's 3 that are special, and they are highlighted here: collaboration and leadership, innovation and finance, and community resilience. So these 3 are special because they don't have specific outputs related to decreasing a specific number of greenhouse gas emissions. These are more about like, how are we approaching this work? How can we be successful in this work? And so this is about systems. It's about what we value and how we are going to do the work. So these three were really important to identify, because we can have all the technical solutions that we want, and we know there are a lot of them, but if we don't have the mechanisms to and the will to actually move those things forward, then we're still going to be, on the treadmill running in place. So so for each of these, like I said, there are specific goals and strategies, even with these three that are more about systems. So again, I'll encourage you to go to that site, because you can dig in to any or all of these that you like. So I wanted to get into our Douglas County and City of Lawrence plan, because as I mentioned before, the regional plan is great, and it's important that there's local buy-in for the plan in order for any progress to be made. So we are going to be starting on a locally specific climate action plan for Douglas County and the City of Lawrence. And we know that some of the technical solutions, some of the things that were developed for that Kansas City regional plan may make sense for Wyandotte County, but it may not make sense for Douglas County. So for example, if one of the action steps is related to making all homes energy efficient, we know in Douglas County that we have a very large rental population. And so if we're telling our population, the number one thing you can do is insulate your attic, but the majority of our population doesn't have any control over what happens in their attic, then that's not a locally specific plan that will make sense, and we will lose credibility, and we won't be able to make as much progress as we could have. So another example is related to, there's one of the action items in the regional plan is related to landfill gas. Methane gas is a very potent greenhouse gas. And so in landfills emit a lot of it. So one of the strategies is how to reduce that. In Lawrence, the landfill that serves Lawrence actually captures that methane and cleans it up and sells it as natural gas. And so, reducing the methane at our landfill wouldn't quite make sense. And so that's why we think it's really important to do a locally specific plan so that we can engage with our community around the topics, see what makes the most sense, and there might be things that we missed in the big regional plan that are really relevant to our community, but got lost because it was that one step further. So I also put on here a book that I highly recommend, which is called Emergent Strategy, and it is by an author named Adrienne Marie Brown. And I really appreciate it because she is grounded in nature. And so a lot of the work that she does is related to community engagement and activism, but it's rooted in nature and natural systems. And so lots of inspiration in there. But one of my favorite quotes from the book is related to this challenge that we have related in we have all the answers that we need, so why can't we just go do them? And so she frames it as, we have all the information we need to create change. It isn't a matter of facts. It's a matter of longing, having the will to imagine and implement something else. So thinking through, what do we want to imagine? What do we want to imagine for our future? And do we have the will to actually make that happen? That's the challenge. And that's where we are focusing our energy on our Douglas County plan so that we can generate that will and imagination so that we can move forward as a community related to climate action. So all that to say, we still have, oh, I should go back, timing. So like I said, the regional plan was just adopted a couple months ago. We are trying to get started on our locally specific plan in the next few months. But in the meantime, we are still doing work, and we have been for a while. So if you know anything about Lawrence, even if you've never been there, you may even have an idea of what Lawrence is. It has the reputation of being, the tree hugging capital of Kansas. And so all that to say, we've have people that have been working on environmental issues for generations in Lawrence. So all the work that we have done, that we are doing, is really built on a lot of the work that people have been putting in for years and years and years. And we've been doing things that haven't necessarily been a specific part of a climate plan, but have been all working towards the same climate solutions that we are talking about. And so one of those that is another example of a locally specific plan is food systems. So we have agriculture as a big part of our economy in Douglas County, and food systems is one of those things that leaders realized over a decade ago was really key to our economy, as well as the sustainability of our community. And so we developed this food system plan that has actually a lot of the same strategies that is in the most recent regional climate plan. But we know that we all depend on food and that we're all connected. And so this is one example of how we as a local government are approaching the climate crisis, is looking at how can we have a more secure food system and more resilient food system. So within our plan, we have 5 goals. This was adopted in about almost 5 years ago, and I'm pleased to say that have made a ton of progress on this. We have a food policy council that advises our city and our county related to these issues. We have a lot of community buy-in because the community was involved in creating the plan. And so we actually have nonprofits in our community that are using this plan to actually develop their work plans, to write grants, to advance this work. And so one example of how we are moving forward in this is the grant that I mentioned at the beginning related to food composting and claiming food, gleaning from the fields. And so we already had the framework, so we were able to write this grant and successfully. And happy to share, here's one of the successes. Last week, we had some folks go out and harvest almost 100 pounds of spinach from a farm that we were able to directly connect with the food bank in our community. And so these are the types of success stories that, we're reducing waste. All the energy that went into the spinach is now going into somebody's body instead of just wasting away in the field or being thrown in the trash, or, it could have been composted, but this is better. And so this is just one example of some of the work that we are doing. And I could literally spend a whole nother hour just talking about food. If you want to know more, I'm always happy to connect you with more resources on that. But I wanted to demonstrate that, this is an area where you don't always have to wait for a plan, of the perfect plan, because we knew that the conversation around food needed to advance before we were even ready to have a conversation around a countywide climate plan. So I'll keep it moving here. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is here are some other things that we've been doing in the meantime, before, while we're in the process of thinking about what the climate holistic plan looks like. We're doing policy all the time related to climate. The goal for me is to really integrate it into every policy that comes before the city or the county. And so here's just a few examples of where we're really trying to integrate climate work into the work. So, oh, so fast. Our strategic plan at the city level, funding decisions are going to have to start to think about climate. That's different, and budget. Our safe routes to school plan. How are we getting options for kids to walk or bike to school so they don't have to drive or ride the bus? Our Plan 2040 is our long range plan for our community. And climate is in there in a different way than it has been. Everything that we are doing, if there's opportunities to integrate the concepts that are related to climate change, reducing our impact, adjusting to the changes that we expect, that's the work that is going to have long lasting impacts. So up the upper left, you'll see the wind turbine. So 60% of the energy that we're using at county facilities is coming from wind now. That's different than a year ago. So those are some of the examples. And then my favorite news of the month, because it's just May, but I'll say the year. So 1 year ago, the city of Lawrence adopted a goal of 100% renewable energy by 2035 for both city operations and community-wide. And at the time, people were like, how are you going to do that? Like, you're nowhere near that. And we said, we're not sure yet, but we know that we need to make this goal so that we can make progress towards it and figure out what the goal is. So that was a year ago. As of last week, Evergy, our utility provider for the city of Lawrence, announced that they are closing the coal plant in Lawrence as a part of its plan to cut carbon emissions. This is a huge deal. Like, I can't take credit for this, but I mean, this is so different than where we were as a community even 3 years ago. There was, people were having conversations around like, when is that going to close? Everybody was like, we don't know, it's working fine. And so just to fast forward to today, where they are actively starting to decommission this plant, is a huge success. So that's my favorite news of the year, I will say. And another example of how when you set ambitious goals, even if you don't exactly know how you're going to get there, even the goal itself can be really powerful. Okay, thanks for sharing the joy with me on that. So I wanted to bring it back to this idea of, what's our role in all of this? We are individuals. We only have so much impact on the earth, on our carbon footprint. We can only do so much. And so sometimes it can be discouraging to think about, our place as a small ant on this large world. But I wanted to close with this ray of hope, which is, if you're ever thinking about if there's just one thing, because I'm sure any of you that are passionate about this, passionate about climate change, people may ask like, okay, but what's the one thing I should do? What's the one thing that I could do that will really make an impact? And so I was listening to a podcast yesterday that helped sum it up. So I'm going to do my best to share with you. There's two pieces that are required. So first is doing anything that helps to focus moment to moment, thinking about what the future is that we want to create. So what are the small choices that we can make each day to create the future that we want tomorrow? You can't vote every day. Like, systems change is what I live for, but you can't do systems change every day. You can't vote every day. You can't, do some of those big things every day, but you eat every day. So what's a small choice that you can make that can help you stay grounded to what your values are, and help you create that next future? So that's part one, is figuring out what that piece is. Part 2 is to think of your actions as a form of communication. Your action is an invitation to others to join you. So people who are taking individual action can lead to more people taking more action, this ripple effect. But it's not about the simple action itself. It is talking about it that gives it power. So that invitation, it's not just doing your best to recycle appropriately in your home and then putting your recycling out. It's, how could you do that and invite others to join you in a way that is inviting and not judgmental? Because we know that there's no perfect environmentalist. We all do things that we do the best we can. And we need to invite people into that space because we can really be powerful together. So if you're thinking about like, what is that one thing, it's different for everyone. And so I want to do an activity. So first, I want you to just grab a scrap piece of paper or something that you can write on. If you do things on your computer, you can use that too. But just grab something. And we are going to think about what the one thing is that, or one of the many possibilities, things that you can do. And so we're going to do this activity that's a Venn diagram. And I call it a blueprint. This is a blueprint for your action. So you're going to make 3 circles. And the top circle is going to be what brings you joy. Because you always have to center joy, right? That has to be at the top. So thinking about what brings you joy. So draw a circle. Think about what motivates you, what gets you up in the morning, what is the thing that brings you joy in your life. It doesn't have to be related to climate. It may not be at all, but what makes you happy? So write that in your first big circle. Okay. In the next circle, so in the lower right, your overlapping circle is what is the work that needs doing? So what is the climate challenge or solution that you feel like you would want to work on? You can just pick one and write it in that circle. And then the third one, the third overlapping circle is what are you good at, or what resources do you have? What are the things that that you have special skills related to, that you could bring to the table, things that you don't have to think too much about because you're already good at. And just jot a few things down. And then after you've done that, think about what you should do, which is overlapping all 3 of those things. We know that climate work is never ending. It can be exhausting. And so all the more important that we are passionate about what we choose to work on. If you know that energy is the biggest opportunity, or let's say transportation is the biggest opportunity. We need to reduce our emissions, but you don't really you live in a space where you have to drive everywhere, then picking that as your issue to work on may be quite draining for you. So thinking about what is at the convergence of these 3 circles, that's what you can spend your time on. That's what's most impactful. That's the work that you can do that's most impactful. So I like this activity because it really personalizes it. There's not one magic bullet for everybody, but there may be something in here that you find in yourself that could really help to be fulfilling for you. So I'm not sure if people actually did that activity, but if you did, it would be interesting to hear. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen. Oh, there's two more slides. One is climate ambassadors. We're looking for folks to engage with others in their community around these topics. And then the other one is, this is my joy. These are my two boys, Zeke and Xavier. And this is the future that I'm working towards. So I always like to ground myself there. So I'd like to stop sharing my screen and see if anybody would be willing to share, if you have anything to share, or we can also engage in conversation.
Yeah, I thought that was fabulous, Jasmine. I'm trying to work on, well, I'm moderating a team in St. Joseph. We don't have a sustainability director, but we do have some motivation in trying to work on a resolution to decrease energy use in general, and certainly to decrease use of non-renewables. So that was very, very helpful. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Diane. And I will say that the work that you're doing could be what's in the center of your converging circles there. So, working on those types of issues with other people in your community, like that could be it. That could be your contribution in your action.
Yeah, so let me ask you, so what I feel like I have knowledge in a variety of ways, at least historically, and I do feel like I think education is, or allowing people to hear about these types of things is, so important. But what makes me happy is to make others happy. So that might be a problem so doing this in a very positive way, I think, as you mentioned, is so important. Yeah, not dragging people down as we do it. So, but then that leads another problem. How do you make people happy as you do this? We don't. If I lived in the sunflower state, maybe that would help. I don't. So, but you're doing a beautiful job.
This is Jerry. I guess I thought of reducing food waste, which was, I think, one of the top 10 actions you can take according to Drawdown if everybody scales up. And I think of eating lower on the food chain. I don't think I would become a vegetarian or a vegan, but I can certainly eat lower on the food chain. I can eat less meat, especially beef and lamb. I like to eat leftovers instead of throwing it out. So usually when I go to a restaurant, I take my own take-home box, container, whatever. And now that spring is about, my wife and I, we're starting to go to the farmer markets so we can eat more locally.
That's a great example, Jerry, because then you get, the things that you like to do, which is eat out anyway, and thinking about how that plays into, the choices that you make and as it relates to climate. So thanks for sharing.
I could share something. I'm Jim, and seems like somewhat of a stretch perhaps, but what brings me joy is being a construction volunteer with Habitat for Humanity and building affordable housing. And the homes we build are much more energy efficient than what the people are living in at present. So that I take joy in doing that.
Yep, another great example, Jim. And I can see the convergence of all those things. And I think the one thing that you could do, if you don't already, is thinking about that part 2 of the individual action of inviting others to join you, or talking about why that's important to you, that could really, expand the work.
Yeah, and we're actually doing that. When I say we, there's a team of us from church. And prior to COVID, when we could be at church, we would about twice a year have an information table to share with people what Habitat does. What I'm struggling with is what I'm good at, and I'm not good at construction. So I'm grateful for those who are there that know what they're doing. I'll have to work on that.
Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. And terrific presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. Does anyone else want to share? Oh, Diane.
Well, I have a question, but
Yeah.
so you said you had a lot of input from various sectors of the community, so they could help with ownership of that. We've tried to have a variety of stakeholders as well, but if you could expand on how you came about that diversity in your ownership there. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about our food system plan, and then that's informing how we're shaping up our Douglas County climate plan. So for our food system plan, well, first of all, I'll say that local governments are usually not great at community engagement. Usually local governments are notorious for holding a public meeting that may be convenient for staff, but not for the community. And maybe one or two meetings, and then that's it. There's a shift happening, I will say. I think more and more local governments are realizing that it's really important to hear from voices in the community. For our food system plan, 5 years ago, we really tried to center the voices of community members that historically have not been invited to participate in planning processes, meaning communities of color, rural communities, especially in Lawrence, Douglas County. Lawrence makes up the majority of the population. And so oftentimes it's just like, if we get people from Lawrence, then that's good enough. So oftentimes the rural voices are left out. And so we actually hired people from the community, the communities that we were hoping to reach, to do outreach within their own communities. And so we hired, I think it was 10 people on a part-time basis to go and talk with their family members, their neighbors, their friends about food. And it was over dinners, and it was through like photography and art. It was through poetry. So we really looked at creative ways to get folks at the table to share in different ways than the traditional, like, here's a survey, fill it out. And we're going to try to replicate that with our climate plan as well. There's also the more traditional ways of connecting with different business associations in town, and we have a university in town, and so there's a whole nother university population. But I think the biggest thing is being able to connect with folks where they are. And as local government, as I mentioned, because of the history of local governments and mistrust, that was not easy to start with. And so even just like building those relationships before you ask for something is important to do. That is hard to understand the importance of until you actually need that type of feedback. So, I mean, it really is all about relationship building in a time when before you need the feedback is the best time to do it.
I have a question. Lawrence has the University of Kansas and Johnson County has Johnson County JUCO.
Mhm.
I'm wondering how impactful actions from the university are. I know in Johnson County, I think that the junior college has been very active in some of the things it has done. Earthkeepers took a tour out there several years ago. I was just amazed at what they are trying to accomplish, how they retrofitted some of their buildings. So I guess my question is, do you see the University of Kansas as being very helpful in what you're trying to accomplish?
I think institutions like universities can be very influential in pushing and advancing things. Like I said, the University of Kansas is a huge employer in our community. It's a huge draw to the community, and so when they take a leadership position as it relates to something, people notice. I will say that Haskell Indian Nations University is also in Lawrence, and they are the ones that are actually doing much more innovative work around climate in our community and our region. So, which shouldn't be surprising because a lot of what we are talking about when it comes to climate adaptation is harkening back to indigenous knowledge anyway. And so they are really in a leadership position when it comes to climate work in our community. Unfortunately, the University of Kansas has gone through a lot of budget cuts, and their whole sustainability department has been pretty much eliminated. And so a lot of the ways that they were leaders in the past, they don't have the capacity to even tell their story. Even if they are doing things internally, they're not able to tell their story because they don't have the staff to do that. So on the bright side, they still have lots of researchers and professors that are doing great work on the faculty side, but on the staff side, it's not as, I don't think KU is as strong as it was in the past as it relates to climate or sustainability.
And if I could add to that, you mentioned Johnson County Community College, and yeah, their sustainability programs and sustainable agriculture programs, fantastic. The KU Edwards campus is, also located in Overland Park, and so that's where I'm on the adjunct faculty. And KU Edwards just signed on to the Renewables Direct program. So yeah, so now Edwards is going to be sourcing its power, from renewable sources through Evergy. And then I'm not sure what all the K-State Innovation Campus is doing, but we've got 3 academic institutions in Johnson County that that I think have the potential to partner a lot together. I know as far as environmental education goes, Johnson County and KU Edwards are now partnering so to allow community college students to complete their environmental studies degree. So that's a I think a growing relationship that has a lot of potential with all those institutions.
Thanks for bringing that up, Scott. And I will just add on to that in thinking about on the K-State side, carbon capture and using soils and agricultural practices as carbon sinks. There's a big opportunity there as well. So in terms of research and application, there's a lot of good work that's happening.
Yeah, I think I do think that one of the programs that they're doing out at K-State Olathe is urban agriculture. So I think they're offering, a graduate degree in like urban agriculture too. So that could tie directly into what we're talking about. Cool.
You say that Douglas County has goals, and I saw the year when such is expected to be reached. How are you measuring your ability? How are you measuring how close you're getting to these to this end product? Are you going to do it by years to see how far you've gotten, say in 2025? So some of these dates that are so far out there, I'm sure I won't be here to check to see if you really made it. But so are you measuring yourself at intervals?
Yeah, great question. Yes. So the big measure is greenhouse gas emissions. And so we are doing that on a 5 year, every 5 years we measure it basically. And so, so let's see, 2017 was the last time. So it'll be coming up soon. The next measure point, which I expect that will have made a lot of progress. Some of it is like if we know that if we make this switch on energy from coal to wind, then we'll have that will reduce our emissions by a certain amount. And so that will be kind of easy to see what that impact is on a more immediate basis than measuring the whole 100% of what our emissions are. But thinking back to that version of a pie chart, it is really about energy and transportation. And so we may do some measurement in between those 5 year increments that's really just focusing on those two pieces that are much easier to measure than the random gases that are produced at different industrial plants in the county, which are a very small percent of our overall picture. So yeah, we'll be doing reporting out for in intervals related to our progress.
Thank you.
Joan had a question.
Well, Jasmine, if I just also might join in on the regional plan, we're also, our benchmark was 2015 for greenhouse gas emissions, and we will be measuring every few years and reporting that out as well for the 10 county region.
Thanks, Joan.
While I was sitting around waiting for people to log in on Zoom, I was watching out of the corner of my eye a report on the CBS or the PBS NewsHour, and they were talking to somebody about hydrofluorocarbons and the contribution they make. Amazingly, the number 9% came up. I'm not sure what that was 9% of, but the point was is very significant. Refrigeration is where this is being used, and the HFCs, the hydrofluorocarbons, are 1,000 times more potent than CO2. I think methane is about maybe 23 times more potent. Supposedly, HFCs don't last as long though, and even though they're more potent. So the point of that report was it's really important to try to attack the refrigeration problem because it will have almost an immediate impact, whereas some reducing carbon might take decades or centuries to have an effect. So the example they gave, if you're buying a new car or a new refrigerator in the last few years, they may already have this new gas instead of the old gas that is such a potent greenhouse gas. Any thoughts about how that can be done on a countywide basis, addressed on a countywide basis?
So one of the things that is related to that is like when you mentioned, like if you're buying a new appliance or unit, what's happening with the old unit. And so thinking about, like, we have our household hazardous waste site as that will be more and more important to make sure that people are disposing of those things properly, as opposed to, feeling good about themselves that they're buying a new refrigerator and then just putting the other one in the basement, or, leaving it on the side of the road, or those types of things. So I think from a waste standpoint, that's what I would be focusing on, is how can we make sure that, when as those are being cycled out, that they're being appropriately disposed of.
I have kind of an unrelated question. I've been in and out of Lawrence over the last 2 or 3 decades. There used to be a chemical fertilizer plant there on the on the east side, and they took it down. Is there any contamination there, or is that a clean spot for development or for agriculture?
Yes to both. So still having some challenges with cleanup. So there's still a lot of cleanup to do. We do have some parts of the site that are available for development. So we've actually have some economic incentive packages available and have built out a couple different pads for businesses to move into. But the site is big. It's a really big site, and the contamination was a lot worse than what the city realized when they took over the site. And so actually there was the city commission recently was considering funding a whole position just to manage the cleanup of what needs to happen with the cleanup, the project management for that site, because it was just a lot more than anybody really bargained for. So we're still trying to figure out what the best uses for the whole site in general are, but there are some redevelopment opportunities right now.
Is that considered a Superfund site?
That's what I expected it to be, but I don't think it's been classified as that yet.
Would that be important to accomplish?
I'm not for sure. My experience working in counties related to brownfields and Superfund sites, usually it seems like there's usually funding that is attached to that could help. But I know that we have someone working on it who's worked for the state, and so I'm sure that they're doing whatever needs to be done. But yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the implications are for the designation or not having the designation.
Sure.
Diane, go ahead.
One other question, and thank you. You're really doing a good job of keeping up with my raising my hand. What is your relationship, and how do you work with the Sustainability Advisory Board that you have there in Lawrence?
So the Sustainability Advisory Board is a city advisory board. Its role is to provide recommendations, policy recommendations to the city commission. I serve as staff to that board. So I go, plan the meetings and anything that they need as it relates to, how the city works or processes, that's me. That board is made up of 10 people from City of Lawrence. There's no special qualifications required. It's just 10 people that are interested in sustainability. So right now we have a high school senior on there. We have a sustainability professional who works in like a chemical company. We have a professor from the University of Kansas on there. So it's a wide variety of folks. And yeah, they have a broad task of advising on issues as it relates to sustainability. In the last couple of years, they've really taken on their role and made recommendations specifically related to the 100% renewable policy. And they are trying to move forward a conversation on plastic bags in Lawrence that's been many years in the workings. And so they've continued to push the city commission on items and make some very specific policy recommendations. So that's their role.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess in Kansas City, Missouri, there's a lot of community gardens and vacant lots and that sort of thing. Are there opportunities in Lawrence for that sort of thing?
So our office actually manages a community garden program where we provide city land to people in the community to grow food. It's called Common Ground. And I think we have around 7 sites now. And we also have an incubator farm. So we have a 5-acre farm where we are working with folks who are interested in experimenting whether they want to get into farming or not. And so we lease out those lots to those folks and provide some extra support to them as well. So we are not the only community garden program in town, but we do run the city, the community garden program that's on city land. There's also the schools that have gardens as well. Some churches do, but the Common Ground program is the one that I think most people know best.
Besides First Presbyterian Church, are faith communities doing anything powerful in the community as far as pushing sustainability or earth care?
So there's the group that Thad Holcomb is involved with, which is an interfaith group, Lettuce. Now I'm forgetting what it exactly stands for, but that group is an interfaith group that makes pretty regular appearances before the city commission, sometimes before different boards and other advisory boards as it relates to policy. And so they're advocating for different policy changes to be better in line with environmental sustainability. So I think that's one of the big things. And I did see a question in the chat. It looks like it was just to me. Marie was asking about a local city who's talking about adding a sustainability director position in Kansas. And as I said, there's only 2 of us right now. I talked to someone about the exact thing this morning, and the way that I would suggest is one possible way to get some traction is related to the infrastructure packages that are coming down from the feds. The federal government, there's going to be a lot of money related to COVID, related to stimulus, and thinking about how to leverage those funds and having a staff person that can help to identify the opportunities to bring to your community would be one way to think about what a position could look like to start with. Not that it needs to be a permanent position, but it could be that by creating a special projects position to better position the city to take advantage of those funds that are coming from the federal and maybe the state, I don't know, we'll see, then that position could possibly demonstrate enough value that could, evolve into something else. But that's the advice that I gave someone this morning, is thinking about like, okay, how can you demonstrate value for something that's very timely? And right now, cities don't have enough capacity to really see all the opportunities that are coming towards them. And so that's where a position like mine, I still don't have all the capacity, but in thinking about in the past, even for the direct renewables option that Scott mentioned earlier about how to take advantage of that wind opportunity, if there wasn't my position, Evergy probably would have been talking to like the facilities director, who may or may not care about wind, and it may have just gone in his inbox and out his inbox because he has like literal things on fire or water break or other stuff that they have to think about. And so having someone in a position that can think a little bit broader than this, just the immediate challenges, can be really advantageous. And I think the current opportunity with the conversations that are at least happening around the infrastructure bill could provide that opportunity for cities. Okay, Jerry put lettuce in the chat. Lawrence Ecological Teams United in Sustainability. Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah. You've mentioned wind several times. Is anything happening with solar in Douglas County?
Well, one, we have a couple solar companies in Douglas County, which is great. The challenge is that the state of Kansas does not have any type of incentives for solar. And so, and until recently, until like this year, it was almost like people were being punished for putting solar on their on their buildings. So right now, the system is not set up to support solar, or to be very supportive of solar. We're working on trying to make sure that our like building codes and development codes are friendly for solar, so that it's people can almost fast track their solar installations. But even with that, it's difficult because the pricing, even with how solar has come down significantly, it's still a big investment, and it would be really helpful to have a little more incentive at the state level.
So you're saying that wind actually has better incentives than solar right now?
Well, the wind is done at more of a large scale, and solar can be done on a building to building scale. And so that's where the difference is, if I wanted to put wind on my house, I would not be very successful at doing that. It wouldn't generate very much, at least. And so solar is one of those things where people feel like this is one thing that I can do, but at the same time, it's somewhat cost prohibitive currently because there aren't those incentives that, like on the Missouri side, for a while, there were a lot of really great incentives for solar that just never happened on the Kansas side.
You probably know that Evergy is in the process of building a wind or solar farm someplace in the vicinity of Kansas City, considered local to Kansas City. So that's an example of, I guess, scaling up like the wind farms. But rooftop solar, you talk about resiliency in the power grid. That's a real selling point. I think you know it, we all know it, but it's convincing the Kansas Corporation Commission to make that possible with their three commissioners. Is that it? Kansas Corporation Commission?
I think that's right. It's 3 or 5, but you may be right with 3.
Okay.
Yep. Some things need to happen at the state level.
Well, I want to do a time check here. It is past 8:30, and I want to respect Jasmine's time and also everyone else. And we've had some folks drop off. So just want to invite, are there any last pressing questions for Jasmine?
I'd just like to thank Jasmine for sharing her knowledge with all of us. It was really a pleasure to spend the evening with you. Thank you.
I'd say the same, yes.
Yep, thanks so much. It was great to hear.
Yes. So Jasmine, thank you so much. Your knowledge and your passion for sustainability is encouraging, not only for what you've accomplished, but also I think for each of us to continue to fight the good fight that can be discouraging at times. And so thank you for coming and giving us ideas, and also giving us a boost of energy to continue the important work that each of us have. So anyway, with that, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Diane, Jerry, any final thoughts that you'd like to say before we go? And Jasmine too, I'll give you a final word too. Diane? I
think I've said all I need to say. So
right.
Again, thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Diane?
Yeah, just go Lawrence. You're just working miracles over there. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Diane. Jasmine, any final thoughts from you?
I just wanted to thank you all for the work that you're doing, and as a reminder, it's about inviting others to do the work together, so that we can change these systems, because we have to. So I promised and then failed to share some links with you. So Jerry, I'll just send a few links, and then if you want, I can send you the presentation. I don't know if others would be interested in that.
We occasionally the speakers will agree to do that. And we can also include the recording.
Okay,
We can send out the a copy of the slides, the recording, and your links.
okay, great.
Great. All right.
Great.
Great. Well, Jasmine, once again, thank you so much. You did a wonderful job, and we're so happy to have you with us tonight. And thank you all for coming and taking some time out of your evening. I just put in the link, the chat, my email, and my the web address for Sustainable Sanctuary Coalition. We've got other programs in the works, and we would love for you to come out and join us for those. We on our webpage, you can sign up to get our emails where I send out a link to the information about the programs coming up, but also we have a Facebook page and all that sort of thing. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Jerry sends out email, Diane too. And I think, yeah, Jasmine, once again, just thanks so much. And we really appreciate it. And we hope you all have a great night tonight.